CJ Grisham, Grisham. Sorry, let me fix that so I can hear you a little better. Okay.
And so, if you would mind putting your title on here as well.
Oh, yeah. So, CJ Grisham, Grisham. I'm the president and founder of Open Carry Texas.
If you wouldn't mind talking to me just a bit about your reaction initially when you heard about this incident. Like we discussed over the phone, there's a lot of different issues at play when it comes to firearms involved. So, what was your initial reaction?
Well, obviously, my initial reaction was one of a little bit of dismay because once again, here we are. This has come to Texas now. All this protest, all this looting, rioting, and now it's come to Texas. And great, where do we go from here? How bad is it going to get? Because that was just before I knew anything about what had happened. Just hearing that there was a shooting during a protest.
You know, I know we've seen a lot of people exercising their Second Amendment rights and the right to open carry at protests over the last 6 months. From your perspective, have you guys seen more people coming out and doing so? And if so, do you have maybe a thinking or a reasoning why that might be?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question one more time? You clipped out on me.
Did I lose you there a little bit? I've been having some issues today with my internet, so I apologize. You know, we, from our perspective, have seen an uptick or maybe more people coming out and exercising their Second Amendment rights or their right to open carry at these protests over the last 6 months. Is that something you all have seen as well? And maybe your thoughts on that?
I think so, because what we've seen is an uptick of, as there are more protests, the protests have obviously, in many of the bigger cities especially, have gotten very violent. And as a result of that violence, people have been exercising their Second Amendment rights for two reasons. One, because they're a protester and they recognize that there are counter protesters who are out there attacking protesters. So the protesters need to defend themselves. And then two, there are business owners, property owners, and members of the public that aren't part of the protest and the riots and the looting and all that kind of stuff. They just want to protect their communities. So it's kind of an uptick on both sides. It started because these so-called peaceful protests have frequently become, and all too frequently, become violent. And it's not just the protesters being violent, but it's the police being violent against the protesters. It's the protesters being violent against the police. It's the counter-protesters being violent against the protesters being violent against the counter-protesters. And so, but everything points back to these protests that have gotten violent way too many times, and that's part of the problem. So yes, people have turned to the Second Amendment in order to protect their basic fundamental right to protest, but also their basic fundamental rights to protect their neighborhood and themselves. Oh, now I can't hear you. There you go.
I always forget to unmute
okay.
myself. You talked a bit on the phone there about some things that you saw done right when it comes to utilizing a firearm, and then things that you saw in this incident in particular that were not done right. If you could kind of walk us through, from a gun owner's perspective, kind of what happened here.
So the first thing is the gentleman that was killed was on video just prior to this protest, carrying a rifle, and there is a great deal of responsibility that comes along with carrying a firearm, whether it's a rifle or a pistol, whether it's open or concealed. There's a great deal of responsibility that comes with that. And the attitude of the individual who ended up, unfortunately, dying that night was already one of aggression prior to even going out there, calling people that oppose them words. You've probably seen his video interview where he said, you know, those that oppose us are that word. Well, I guess you can bleep me out. He said those that oppose us are pussies and won't do anything. That's what he said. So he's already creating this tension before he even goes out there. And it's almost as if he's looking for a problem. Then fast forward to the protest that night, and a vehicle that's making a right turn makes a right turn. There's a crowd there. He stops. But then the mob starts to encompass around the vehicle. He honks the horn because he wants to keep going. He doesn't run over anybody. I don't think he had that intent. But Garrett Foster, the guy that was killed, is approaching the vehicle with his rifle at the ready. Now, I don't see anywhere, I haven't seen video of him actually pointing a gun at the car, But that's where he made his first mistake, because by carrying his rifle in his hand at the low ready, that is an aggressive stance, and it's going to cause somebody like the driver of the vehicle to fear for his life and defend himself. So that's where I think the first mistake was. The first mistake was, look, there's already people that are surrounding this vehicle that don't have guns, that are trying to handle this vehicle driving into a crowd. Why would you introduce a gun into a situation where guns don't need to be at that point? So that was the mistake. And it's unfortunate because what Garrett did cost him his life. But I think anybody in that situation, if they were sitting in that vehicle and a mob of people were surrounding him. Now, keep in mind, this was not a sanctioned event. There was no, the roads weren't shut off. This was an open road. People were in the road illegally. They were obstructing the traffic. And this vehicle's just trying to drive. From what I see in the video, it doesn't look like he's trying to run anybody over or be malicious. But now you're sitting in a vehicle and you're surrounded. I don't even know if he knew there was a protest there, but he ended up driving to one. And now he's being surrounded by a mob. Oh, and by the way, one of the people in that mob has an AK-47 in his hands, looking like he's getting ready to shoot me. What am I going to do if I'm in that car? So that's where I think the biggest mistake was. The second mistake was, and apparently there was there was somebody in the crowd as well that fired his gun at the car as it left. There is no authority for anybody to shoot at a retreating target unless that target is a danger to others. And from what I've seen, the guy's driving away from the crowd, from what I've read anyway. And this guy shoots at a vehicle in a crowd where there's a protest. That's completely reckless, and I think that was a mistake as well. He obviously didn't hit the driver, so who knows where those bullets went, and that was just completely irresponsible as well.
To your first point about Garrett and the stance of how
Yes.
the weapon looked like it was being held, a lot has been made, on social media comparing, his open carry to, say, other protests where open carry has been prominent. What would your response be to the people who are saying right now, well, why did this one end in a deadly shooting and these others did not? Is it the difference in how those weapons were being held?
Well, it's a very so this is a very complicated. This isn't just an issue of open carry. If Garrett was just walking down the road, it wouldn't have been an issue. Even if he had it in his hand, it wouldn't have been an issue. When you add the fact that he was open carrying, it was in his hand, it was in a low ready position, and there was a very contentious issue going on where you've got a mob that's surrounding a car that the mob probably thinks is trying to drive and run them over. So both sides are fearing for their lives at this point. But now you've got potentially, I'm just putting my mind into their minds. But you add that to the fact that he's approaching this car in a threatening stance during a very contentious issue. That's where, when you've got all those things conflating and coming together into one ball, that's why he's dead. Had he just been open carrying and minding his own business, wouldn't have been a problem. Had it just been him approaching the vehicle, because we saw recently that NFAC group was marching. I can't remember where it was, but there was a vehicle that was driving, and these guys had their guns in their hands as well, and they approached the vehicle, but it was like one or two people. It wasn't a mob of 30, 40, 50 people. So the dynamics were much different in what happened in Austin than they were up there, and that's why nobody got shot during the NFAC thing, and that's why somebody got shot on Saturday.
You talked a bit there about both sides fearing for their lives. If you could touch on a little bit of the element of, there's been a self-defense argument made for the person in the car. That seems to be, they told police they feared for their lives. If you could talk about kind of how that element comes into play here.
Well, and this is the problem I have with these kinds of protests. I don't have any problems with the protests. Heck, I support the protests. I've provided security at many of these BLM protests and these police accountability protests. The difference is the ones that I go to and the ones I support, if they're going to be in the roads, they're permitted. And the reason that that's important is because drivers need to be aware that there's something going on. If a driver has no idea what's going on because there's just this uprising of people that decide to get together and start marching to the streets, well, they're going to end up accidentally driving to where there's a protest. And I think that's probably what happened here. Is this guy was just driving through Austin. It's a Saturday night in Austin. It's 4th Street, 4th Street and 6th Street, between 4th and 6th. They're very busy, especially on Congress. This guy comes up on a protest he probably doesn't know is there, because there's no permit, there's no police that are blocking roads, and now he's just trying to, he makes a right turn and tries to drive. People are in his way. He honks his horn, and then everything escalates from there. Instead of people just getting out of his way and letting him go, they decide to surround his vehicle. So because of incidents in which, just like in Houston and other places, where people have driven their cars through these protesters out of anger with the intent to hurt people, surely some of those protesters probably believed that that's what this guy might have been doing. But he didn't hit anybody. He didn't hit a single person. He didn't try to hit anybody. And so they probably feared for their lives because of a lack of information. The driver probably feared for his life because of a lack of information, as well as the fact that he's being surrounded. Oh, and here comes a guy with a gun in his hands. And so there was just, this is why it's so important. I believe in the right to protest. I don't believe you need a permit to protest. But if you're going to block streets and you're going to deny the public space, then that's what the permitting process is for. It's to keep everyone safe. It's not to give the government permission to limit or regulate your rights. It's to keep everyone safe and keep people like Garrett alive.
Something I wanted to ask, I am also speaking with the group Texas Gun Sense for this story. They made a similar point that things were done wrong in this situation that led to Garrett's death. And it wasn't necessarily the presence of guns, but maybe what led up to the presence of guns being there. If you guys could respond to their argument, was basically, more permitting, more restrictions on the use of guns in cars that could have prevented this. What's your response to that argument?
Well, Texas Gun Sense is always looking for an angle to restrict liberty. It doesn't matter how little or how big. They're going to take everything and blow it out of proportion and basically try to insinuate that everyone that carries a gun is now a threat. Again, what they're ignoring is the fact that you have a confluence of several different events happening at the same time. You have an unpermitted protest that is not run or organized by anybody. It's just there. You have a driver who probably, and I'm just guessing, drove into this thing unaware. You have the fact that, the driver happened to be armed for self-defense. I guarantee you he's probably never fired that gun before, and he's probably never had to, because he's never had a mob surrounding his car and a guy with an AK-47 approaching him with it in his hand. So what Texas Gun Sense wants to do is take a confluence of a bunch of extremely rare events that happen to come together at one and create this massive, okay, now we need to fix the problem. There is no problem here. The problem started with, there are so many things you can say. Okay, well, if they'd have just gotten a permit, the roads would have been closed. Therefore, the car would have never gone in there. He never would have hawked. They never would have surrounded him. And there never would have been two people with guns coming together. You can also say that had Garrett not open carried the gun or had his rifle with him, none of that would have happened. You can also say had that driver gone down a different street. So there's all kinds of things. I mean, if we're going to talk about laws, let's talk about what was the first law that was broken. You have a bunch of people blocking a roadway and surrounding a vehicle who has every right to use the roadway as they do, and yet they're stopping traffic. So it's interesting that Texas Gun Sense only wants to go after liberty instead of the actual laws that were broken that night.
From your perspective, if you could summarize, is there anything that could have prevented this from happening that night? If not their solution, what would your organization's perspective be on that? Or like you said, is this just a confluence of kind of the domino effect of this rare instance of everything coming together?
So what could have prevented this is training. If you are going to carry a gun, you need to understand what the use of force continuum is, and you have to be able to assess the situation. If I were there and I had my rifle and I'm part of this protest group, and I see that other people are already handling whatever that threat is. I don't see a gun, I see a car. And I also see that there's dozens of people around me. I have no reason, because I'm trained, I have no reason to get involved in that because I make the situation worse by introducing a gun into that situation. So Garrett was untrained, and that is the biggest part, I think. I don't know. I don't know Garrett. But I do know that somebody who is a responsible gun owner is not going to inject himself somewhere that there's not a gun, especially when there are so many potential collateral damage targets all around you. A smart, trained gun owner, and I don't mean training by the government. The government doesn't give this training. I'm talking about people going to the range, people going and taking classes, people watching self-defense videos, would have known that you don't take a gun into a situation like that because nothing good comes out of it. And so that's Open Carry Texas's response is what could have prevented this is training, awareness, and an understanding of the responsibility that gun owners have when they carry a gun out into the public. There's nothing a law can do that would have changed any of that.
Well explained, thank you.
Oh, you know what else would have prevented it? Is the government enforcing the law that people get a permit to block streets.
A quick point, just to get your response. I know you mentioned the potential for collateral damage.
Yes.
Garrett's open carry and the way he utilized his firearm. I have seen some people purport the flip for the person in the car firing into a crowd that ultimately did hit Garrett. But is that something you can respond to as well? Kind of that same argument on the flip side of the collateral damage.
Yes. Well, and it's the same way, but there's a big difference between one man in a vehicle surrounded by a group of people and targeting. And it seems to me that the guy in the car actually had good training because the only person that was shot was Garrett. Nobody else was injured. Nobody else was shot. So the guy obviously was able to pick out his target and only fired when he was able to hit whatever it was he was. And hopefully, I say this, I don't mean this in a bad sense, but hopefully his target was Garrett and not somebody else, and that Garrett was sort of because what I mean by that is, if that's who he was intending to hit, that's all he hit. He didn't hit anybody else. That tells me the guy in the car was much better trained because there was no collateral damage. And that's an assessment that I can't put myself in that situation. If I'm surrounded by a threat, I'm going to take out the biggest threat first, and that's the guy with the gun. And but I probably would not have fired into myself personally. Even from the car, I might not have fired into the vehicle, but I also didn't see a man with an AK-47 coming at my window with it in his hand. So putting myself in the driver's situation, I'm sort of 50-50 about whether I would have fired at the individual. But I would not have fired at him if I didn't have a clear shot. And I think the driver, it seems like he had a clear shot, and that's why he took it, because nobody else was injured. It's a very hard thing to do. You know, you have to make these last-minute decisions. Police do this all the time as well. Soldiers have to do it in combat all the time. When they're being shot at from a crowd, a lot of times we can't shoot back because even though there's a threat in the crowd, you don't shoot back because you don't want to hit innocent people. And so, but sometimes that threat might be greater than the risk of accidentally shooting an innocent person, and you have to take that shot. And sometimes that collateral damage is necessary, and sometimes it's not. But no one, I can't, neither can Texas Gun Sense say for surety what was going through his mind at that moment, and when he should have and should not have taken a shot. And I can tell you, I'm probably in a better position to do that as a combat veteran than anyone in Texas Gun Sense is to make that call.
You know, any other perspective on this as a gun owner, as someone who does carry, anything else you can shed light on for people really who are just trying to figure out what happened here and how this death could have been prevented? From y'all's perspective.
But from our perspective, look, the number one reason for carrying a gun is nothing more than self-defense. Self-defense. If your life is not in danger, you have no reason using that gun. You have no reason having that gun in your hand at all whatsoever. The sole purpose of a gun is self-defense and prevention of crime. That's it. And so if you're going to carry a gun, do so responsibly. Make sure you understand what the laws are about when you can and cannot use force, And also make sure you understand that there are many types of use of force that don't involve firearms. So even though you're carrying a gun, that doesn't mean you have to use it.
Anything else? I know I could pick your brain for
Yeah.
hours. I think that's all my actual questions for today, since we're on a time crunch. But anything else you
The only thing I'll say is it's a tragedy regardless, whether it was a justified shooting or an unjustified shooting. It's a tragedy because um, people were just trying to exercise their rights as they saw fit, and a lot of mistakes were made all around, and unfortunately, it cost someone's life. Whether I agree with what Garrett did or whether I agree with what the driver did, it doesn't matter. What happens is somebody's dead, and they're not allowed to take part in this conversation anymore. And we need to pay attention to all of what happened, and not just the fact that a gun was used. The gun wasn't the problem. It was everything leading up to the use of the gun that was the problem.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
I really appreciate your time and your perspective. This story is set to air tonight at 6 on KXAN, so I'll shoot you guys that link as soon as it does. The digital stream will be up sooner, so I'll actually try to get that to you a bit sooner. But I just wanted to make sure to let me stop this recording. I just wanted to, there's a lot I'm sure you've seen, and like you said, you've already responded to a lot of differing opinions, really splintering off about this. So we're just trying to capture kind of everyone's perspective, and I know you guys always have a good one for in response to some of the arguments that are being made too. So we just wanted to make sure to get you guys in your perspective.
Yeah, and we try to be objective. I mean, if a gun owner screws up, we want to make sure that this is why we think they screwed up. And quite frankly, I think a gun owner screwed up. And I actually have friends who are friends of Garrett's who know Garrett. He's a libertarian like I am. He's a proud defender of the Second Amendment. I just think that Garrett screwed up, and when he screwed, I don't know him. I didn't know him personally, but I've had friends that, as I've been critical of what happened, have contacted me and said, "Oh, you're wrong." I'm like, "No, this Garrett messed up, unfortunately, and he paid for it with his life." So, it's a tragedy. But if we can't call out when our own people make mistakes, then we're no better than the people who are opposing us, who refuse to admit their mistakes. So.
Well, let me know, of course, that you can't say that to a reporter. If any of the people who knew Garrett, friends who have seen some of those arguments being made, and they would like to tell their story or speak out, please send them my contact, give my number out. Like, it should be my email to you, but give it out like candy. If anybody wants to kind of raise a different side of the story, we would always love to hear from them, especially if they knew Garrett personally.
Okay.
That's a tough time for those people too. Loss of life it's a delicate time, so I try not to pester people, but if you'd like to hand it along, I know sometimes that helps people. They want to speak out and clarify some things that are going on too, so feel free to give out my number.
Yeah, part of the joy and the miserable life of a combat soldier who's lost a lot of friends in combat is that death doesn't faze me anymore, so I can look at everything without using an emotional lens, and
objectively.
I try to look at everything objectively because I just don't get emotional about death anymore. And in some ways that's a sad thing because I don't cry at funerals as much, and in some ways it's a good thing because I'm not biased in when I'm looking at things.
Remind me, where and when did you serve?
I just retired in 2015. So from 1994 to 2015, I was in Iraq and Afghanistan. I took part in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and then I was in Afghanistan in 2011.
Thank you for your service. We appreciate it.
They paid me.
Well, thank you double.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. So, one of the reasons I did that, I wanted to do it live because that was obviously a long interview. It was about a 24-minute long video or interview. And I wanted, I'll probably get 30 seconds at most from my wife's over here doing the sexy dance so she's trying to throw me off. I'm gonna turn the camera on. No. So I kind of try to record all these interviews and get them out there so that the whole story of what I said comes out. Plus, I always record my interviews anyway in case it's ever taken out of context. The individual, she is a good journalist, and I've worked with her since she was in Abilene many years ago. And whenever she's had story ideas or needed a point of view, she's always called me. Oh, Greg says hi. So here's I want to talk. I guess I'll talk a little bit about some of the thing. I didn't really get in too much detail here. Well, I guess I kind of did during the interview. But after watching everything, so apparently there's a little bit of different information from my video that I put yesterday, and I'm going to alter what I think possibly happened based on new information that's come out since I did my video yesterday on the way to the wedding. So, the apparently the gun that the guy in the car had was a 44 Magnum. If that's true, then it is possible that the first 5 shots that you hear is not an AK, because a 45 Magnum can, especially in like an urban environment, can sound a lot like an AK-47, especially if fired from a car, because you've got that acoustic vacuum of the vehicle that'll make any gunshot sound a little bit throatier. So if it's true that the shooter had the guy in the car, the shooter had a 44 Magnum, and that's what Garrett was shot with, then it's possible that those first 5 rounds were not an AK, but were a 45 Magnum. And so it's also possible that the first 5 shots did come from the car and not from someone in the audience. Now, I did know and always knew that that the second group of shootings was a pistol. I just assumed, based off the audio, that the first one was a rifle. So if it was a 44 Magnum, that changes things. That changes a lot. And that's what I'm being told, is that it was a 44 Magnum that was in the vehicle, or what the guy in the vehicle had. So likely what happened was the guy turned the corner, encountered a group. He put on his brakes. Okay, he put on his brakes. So he wasn't there to run over people, or he would have run over people. Not a single person in that protest was run over. Not a single person. You can tell in the video, before he makes his right turn, he waits until people cross, and you can see that there's a little bit of an opening to make a right turn, because most of the people are more towards the center and more toward. But when he makes the turn, he runs into the crowd, stops his car, and then he honks. Then you've got, after he honks, this group of people, this mob, that's coming around and surrounding the car. Now, put yourself in the position of that driver. So, I've also rewatched the video footage on a bigger monitor, and I've seen the still shots of Garrett just prior to being shot. And Garrett has his rifle in the low ready in his hand, like up like this, not down at the low ready, up in his shoulder. He's got it up in his shoulder. That's a very threatening and aggressive stance. If you come at my car, especially if I'm surrounded by a mob of people who are now yelling, because that's exactly what happened. As soon as he honked his horn, this is where the first problem happened. And you can't get into all this with the media, because if you start trying to break everything up about what led to what with the media, it's going to get lost, because they're going to cut stuff out. So the first thing that happens is, when he honks, the people don't get out of the way. That's the first problem. That's the first problem. The first problem is the people should just let him go. He obviously wasn't trying to run over people. But see, the problem with these BLM Marxist Antifa rallies is that they're looking, they think if you don't bend to their will, they're going to attack you. So instead of just moving out of the way and letting this guy go along his way, the mob turns around. People who have already left turn around, go back to the car, and start surrounding the car. Okay? One of those people was Garrett Foster. And Garrett Foster, not only did he surround the car with the mob, he also had his gun at the ready, up on the high ready too, not the low ready, the high ready. Look at the picture. I can't remember if I posted it on my Instagram, but it's definitely on Parler. Look at I think I did post it on Instagram. But he's up there at the high ready, not the low ready, the high ready. If you approach my car with 30, 40 other people, and you're threatening me, and you're screaming and yelling like that, I'm going to perceive you as a threat. It's just that simple. Now, as I told the reporter, will I shoot? I don't know. I've got a little bit more training about when to fire and when not to fire. I've had a lot more experience in that, having been fired at many times and had to pick and choose targets in combat. I don't know because I wasn't there and I didn't see what the driver saw. However, I can understand why someone would fire. And even if the driver did fire, I believe personally he was justified in doing so because the largest threat wasn't people with fists, it was a man with an AK 47 in his hands at the ready. And all it would have taken is a split second for him to pull up that AK 47 and start shooting that driver. Why was it in his hands if he wasn't going to use it? That's a question that comes up there. So there were a lot of mistakes made. Garrett never should have approached. Never should have approached. Now, if the guy started shooting in the car while there was just a mob, perhaps he could have approached and then, of course, done the self-defense thing and perhaps taken out a gunman. That would be a little bit more understandable. But if you're in a crowd like that, an AK-47 is not going to help you in a crowded environment like that. Okay, that you're not going to be able to traverse the weapon right. Anybody can just bump into it because it's a longer firearm. Okay, even though I carry my rifles at protests, it's not for close combat necessarily because it's a longer rifle. Even in the military, when we're doing close combat, we have shorter barreled rifles. I believe that the standard M4 is about 10 and a half, 11. No, I think it's like 14 inches is the standard M4. Is the standard M4. So, and the guys that do the room clearings have the shorter barreled rifles. And there's a reason for that, because you don't take a big giant rifle into a room clearing, because as you're trying to traverse that thing inside a building, you're going to hit things. So at the very least, he should have used a pistol. If he was going to have anything in his hand, he probably should have had a pistol. Now, we can Monday morning quarterback this all day long. But what I'm saying is that what I believe happened is, and then the second thing. So let's go with the assumption that the driver was the one that shot the first 5 shots after being surrounded, after he honked to try and clear the road that was illegally being blocked. As he drove off, as the driver drove off, someone in the crowd who also had a concealed carry license, supposedly a license to carry, pulled out his pistol and shot at the retreating vehicle. That guy is probably in more trouble than the driver is, because there is no threat there. That's just, you just don't do that. Anybody that's been to, heck, if you've been to the LTC class, you should have been taught that. You can't shoot someone in the back, someone that's retreating, okay? You can't, unless you're a cop. Then you can shoot anybody you want anytime for any reason, apparently, and get away with it. But you and I, unfortunately, we got to live by rules. So there's a whole lot of mistakes that went on. I just wanted to clarify with the new information that I've gotten that because I hadn't seen this before. So here's what's new from my last video. Garrett was seen approaching the vehicle with his AK-47 at the high ready, not the low ready, the high ready, as he approached the vehicle. The vehicle driver supposedly or allegedly had a 44 Magnum, which makes sense that what I thought was an AK, which I still think it sounds like an AK, but if it was a 44 Magnum, the acoustics of that still makes sense, that it would be a 44 Magnum. So if that's the case, I now change the fact that someone with a rifle was the first one to shoot, and likely in the crowd, because early news and information was that the driver used a handgun. So my assumption was that the first 5 rounds weren't from a handgun. I just never expected it to be a 44 Magnum. That dude, he meant business, apparently. But now that I know the driver had a 44 Magnum, that changes my analysis of what probably happened. So the driver probably did shoot first, if that's the case. And then as he sped off, someone in the crowd fired 3 rounds from his pistol. So that was I always knew the second 3 shots were a pistol. I always knew that all 8 shots were not from the same gun, which some people were trying to say was the case. That's the new information. That's my analysis of what happened. I've got people that are feeding me information from many different sources that are official sources. As I learn more, I will bring up more. But if you go back, if you're just now joining us and you go back and you watch the interview, I did talk about a lot of this, so I'm not going to reiterate a lot of what I said when I did the interview about what mistakes were made. But there were a lot of mistakes made. I think I'm really looking forward to the new footage coming out, because I know that there were protesters that were closer that probably got something on camera. You can see in the videos that there are people that are surrounding the vehicle who have cameras. So there's other footage out there, and I'm hoping that it gets into the hands of the police and eventually gets released to the public. The problem is if it doesn't make the protesters look good, I have a feeling the protesters aren't going to release that footage. They're not going to release anything to the police that is going to make them look bad. So I'm going off of only what I've got so far. All right, before I close up, let's see. So a driver did a mag dump and drove off. Crazy situation. Still waiting for all the details. I think what the driver did was he fired 5 shots, which I guess if it's a 44 Magnum, especially if it was a revolver, probably was all 5 shots. He took out the threat and then left because there was still a threat that was there. So even if he had bullets left over, the threat that was there probably did not justify the use of deadly force. So, all right, what?
Don't even go back that far.
Why carry at a protest?
That's when you do carry.
Why not? I mean, have you seen what's going on at these protests?
No, the correct answer to that is because I can.
There you go, because I can. So he didn't shoot because he was shot at. He shot because he was afraid for his life of the mob and Garrett at the window. Yes, that's what I think, Chris Watson. I think that's the thing. That's where Garrett is responsible for the shooting, because he showed up with his rifle in a tactical position. And remember, he's a veteran now. He's a young veteran. I don't know if he was still on active duty. I don't think he was. I don't know. But I know he didn't make it high in rank. If he was in, he was only in for one stint, and that's it. One enlistment. Oh, good. Steve Nash is here. I missed his wisdom.
Aw, Crimea River.
Yeah. Is a protest the place for rifles? Yes, Pat, it is. Everywhere is a place for rifles. Have you seen the police when they show up to take down protesters? They've got rifles. And the whole point of the Second Amendment is to protect you from tyranny. And what if the police just start opening fire with real rifles on protesters and they don't have rifles to defend themselves with? I mean, I hope it never comes to that, but one day it will. It did for George Washington. Nice. Oh, look, spot on, Emily. Probably the because I can comment. All right. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I'm just reading your comments, Greg.
Emily likes your comments, Greg. That's so funny. Steve Nash thinks that Beto and Biden or anybody is going to take our rifles. That's so hilarious.
First, Steve Nash actually thinks you care what he thinks.
True, true.
Anyway.
Yes. Hey, there's something I agree with Steve on. Garrett made a dumb decision. So correct. So correct. And you know what? I'll even say, I don't know what was going through the driver's mind. Okay, I really don't. If the driver knew that there was a protest there and was just there to cause problems, he made a mistake too. I'm not gonna, because I don't know who the driver is. And look, I'm gonna tell you this: Garrett is friends with a lot of my friends, and a lot of my friends are telling me that Garrett's one of us. He's one of the guys that now. So that means I should be defending him, but I'm not, because unlike the liberals and unlike the left, when somebody makes a mistake, I don't care if you're left, right, or sideways, I'm going to call you out on it. No, that's my whiny cat. He's always whining. Where is that? I do want to screenshot that, actually. There it is.
Of what?
Oh no, that's not it. $50 Walmart card for. Let's see.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Not that one. That one, the other one. That Biden and Beto are going to take our. Here it is. Yeah, I'm going to screenshot that one. That's fun. That Biden and Beto are going to take our assault rifles. Enjoy them while you can. All right, guys. I'm gonna cut this off. Some of y'all missed the early interview, so go back and listen to that. It'll be on KXAN tonight at 6 o'clock. If you're in the KXAN viewing area, which I believe is Austin and surrounding areas. If not, it'll be online. They'll send me a link. I will share that link on my Parler account. So just look for Parler. It's you can look up CJ Grisham, or Chicken Hawk is the name I use there, the @. So CHCKN. Here, I'll write it in here. Oh no, I can't do that. Can I type? How come I can't type?
You should have done it in the description because you're talking.
Okay, I'll just put it in the
It's
description.
not like when you drive and text at the same time. Okay.
Yeah, I know. What the heck? All right. Well, anyway, live chat. There we go. I'll just put it in the description, but I will put the link to the story once it's up on my Parler. But you guys got to hear the entire interview here. And don't forget to like button, share this, and as more information comes out, I will give you my thoughts on it, whether you care or not. Right, Steve? Y'all be safe and be free.